Here bright and early, and I know it's because we all love budget hearings so much that everybody's here right on time. We're going to go ahead and get started, and I think just to kind of get us all with our brains back wrapped around where we are, the auditor's office has been great about providing us some new updated information, and Kim Adamson is just going to give us a kind of a brief overview and talk about some of the things that have developed or happened as a result of our last budget meetings and recent information that we've gotten. So thank you, Kim.
Let me find our documents quick here.
Morning.
No, we only need the computer, I think. It's kind of bad having Carrie Benz and Carrie Deaver sitting in the same spot. I have to call by the last name.
I'm gonna leave this zoomed in a little bit so we can see what it says a little bit better. But I just want to give you a quick recap of where we are through up to today's deliberations. In the first column on this schedule, I'm showing the preliminary budget, which represents where we started the hearings back on June 4th. And since then, there have been a number of adjustments identified, which are factored in then in the middle column of this analysis, the potential budget adjustments. And I'll walk through those just quickly so you can get your bearings on where we are right now. So first of all, in the revenue category, the jail has identified an additional $250,000 of potential revenue associated with beds. They have built in an estimate of renting 60 beds through 2020, and so that equated to an additional $250,000. We had to make an adjustment to some grant revenue for the state's attorney's office, and then an adjustment to the city's share of museum costs to reflect updated costs of personnel in that category. So those total revenue adjustments were $228,347. So up above then you can see we're adding in an additional $228,000 to get us to our current adjusted revenue of $61,281,689. Then I'm going to scroll down, and we've got a number of expenditure adjustments. The first being the 3% matrix adjustment that equated to $1.1 million. Secondly, the cost of all the proposed new positions. That amount, if you recall, started at about $1.8 million, but because we have built in some staggered hire dates through 2020, that number now sits at $1,253,359, and that also includes the impact of a 3% matrix adjustment on those positions. Okay. The next item, there were some position reclassifications that were built into the Deputies Association contract that you recently approved. The impact of that we estimate to be about $116,000. There have been personnel actions occurring since early May when the payroll projection was first created. That equated to just over $10,000. We learned that the bid price for the vehicles the sheriff's office is requesting has gone up $15,000. The Human Services Department has agreed that we can reduce the budget for hospital expenditures by $25,000. And lastly, the allocation to to Carroll Institute for 2020 is reduced by $52,000 from last year's level. So all of those expenditure adjustments total to just over $2.4 million, which then I've made that adjustment up above to bring our total projected appropriations to $64,924,333. That would leave us with a need of, or a cash applied number of almost 6.9 million. We've talked about our target cash applied number being 4.5 million. So we're looking at a $2.4 million budget deficit. But again, that includes all requested positions. This is the all-in number right now. We did get some information from the courts just yesterday, sharing with us some of their projections for 2019 costs. And based on those estimates, if we were to budget 2020 at the same level 2019 would be estimated at, that would raise this number by another $232,000. Those estimates were not built into these numbers at this point.
Any questions for Kim, Commissioner?
I just have one question. I'm wondering why the decrease in the JJRI.
That's because there was a portion of that JJRI money was for bed utilization at JDC. It wasn't all diversion money. And so that program expires in 2019, so we will not see that revenue in 2020.
Okay.
And that's really what that relates to.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, Kim, if you could you explain a little bit about where you got the numbers for the jail budget, or for the court's budget? And, because you said that the information we got yesterday from the courts isn't built in. If you could just explain where your numbers came from.
Sure.
And then Carl is here if any commissioners have any questions about the information Carl provided yesterday.
Essentially, the 2020 budget that's built into our current projection was based on where 2018 landed, with the assumption that a number of the higher cost capital cases will be resolved in 2019, and so that perhaps, and with the addition of the contracted attorney costs, that some of our costs could level out into 2020.
Okay, thank you. So since the information from the courts came in, I think yesterday, during our commission meeting perhaps, Carl was gracious enough to agree to be here today in case any commissioners had any questions about the information he provided. He was kind enough this morning to provide us a kind of bullet-pointed summary of some of the high points of where he's seeing increased costs. And I think it's fair to say a lot of that is court-appointed counsel is a fair bit of that. So does anybody have any questions for Carl as long as he's here?
I would
Commissioner
ask a question.
Barth.
Carl, so what about the translator issue? We've throttled back slightly in civil cases from hiring interpreters. What about going forward? Are we thinking that will continue to rise, or will we be able to go down a little bit?
I think that's a relatively small portion of this picture, Commissioner, unfortunately. My estimate to the auditor's office was that those exclusions for certain civil case types would save about $20,000 over the course of the year. In contrast to the court-appointed attorney expenses, I think interpreters are one of those areas where we're actually extraordinarily efficient in interpreter appointments in general. I mean, as I recall, the average interpreter appointment is about $37. I think courts across the country would envy how well we're able to control costs and interpreters. And so if my estimate of $20,000 in savings, if that civil exclusion were to continue, I think that's what the savings the county would see. But as you can see from my bullet notes, $20,000 pays for one murder case, maybe. And so it's I think that's a bright area on our efficiency, but it's relatively small, unfortunately.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay.
I'll ask another one.
Okay.
Is there any chance that we can cut down on the number of people that refuse to pay for their own defense? In other words, that have the assets but just choose to have the court appoint somebody on a no cost to them basis or on to a public defender, public advocate, as they drive home in their Hummer.
We have taken a run at that. When I say we, I mean commissioners and judges and I have taken a run at that issue in past years. For example, a couple of years ago, the county convened a committee to look at that. Financial screening. That means, however, that someone has to do the screening. In other words, it has to be staff allocated. We have to have some access to private financial data to verify their representations about what their income is. There's a significant overhead in doing that screening, which is what we ran into last time. We also did some very creative things, I have to say. Like, for example, we used GPS tracking for a portion of the caseload to look at what the average housing prices were for the court-appointed attorney recipients. And as I recall, the average house price for a lot of the recipients was under $100,000, which is pretty rare, to get a house under $100,000 in Sioux Falls. And so our analysis we've done in the past has indicated that, yeah, there may be some abuse, there may be some misrepresentation in those applications, but we had difficulty finding a lot of it.
Commissioner Karski.
Looking at the average cost per case going up 30%, I mean, huge. And you're saying that in 2018, other than habeas, you didn't have any billings for court-appointed attorneys?
It happened to fall that way in 2018, Commissioner, in our billings last year, for private court-appointed counsel.
So how did 2017 look? I mean, was 2017 more similar to 2019? I mean, is 2019 the anomaly, or is
No,
it?
not necessarily. In the budget memorandum I sent just yesterday, I have to apologize for tossing that at the commission so quickly, but when we got Carol's email that you were coming up on this meeting, we thought, well, we ought to at least share what we have, because you're coming toward the decision point. And so we sent that over. In that memorandum, I did a long-term bar chart of what the overruns were, and if you'll remember, the worst year actually was 2016. And so I know this is no consolation at the moment with the budget struggles the county's facing now, but 2016 was a lot worse, relatively speaking. And so it does vary from year to year. 2018 to 2019, just as you say, there was a significant jump. 2016 was worse. And so it does vary from year to year. Kim did the projection based on what the actuals were last year. In my mind, that's maybe a reasonable way to do it, because how many murders are we going to get this year? I don't know. Good luck predicting. I mean, I'm sure Aaron McGowan would love to pin down that number also, and Tracy. What do we want to predict as far as high-level felony cases go? What do we want to predict as far as death penalty cases go? Boy. I think maybe using actuals last year is a reasonable way to do it, and then maybe handle it as a supplemental or happily a surplus. I think we had one year about 10 years ago.
I was going to say I wasn't here when that happened.
It happens rarely. It was $69,000. I remember we came over and did a happy dance with the commission that year. And so that's the challenge. That's the difficulty. And I know it's frustrating for the commission, and it's frustrating for me. And when I write that memorandum up and I do the projection of the overrun, it's as unsettling to me, I'm sure, as it is to you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Just a comment. I think this is always a kind of a guesstimate. It'll be higher, most likely, than what we expect. At the same time, in a sense, Carl has a blank check on some of these expenses for outside attorneys and stuff. And I can remember years where consciously we knew we weren't appropriating enough, but it's a reasonable presentation that he's given us, and I think we have to go with it.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Kim, did you have some comments you'd like to make?
I just wanted to add that I did go back and find the supplement amounts for the courts over the past 3 years. In 2018, we supplemented $235,000. In 17, $237,000, and in 16, $653,000. We have gradually been increasing that budget over the last 3 years, and we're seeing a supplement in that $200,000 to $250,000 range right now is pretty typical.
Okay,
Okay.
that's the good news, right?
Yeah.
All right, so that takes us to ambulance funding. First item on our agenda today was ambulance funding. We haven't really had an opportunity to visit about that yet. I think you've had an opportunity to see applications that we received on a timely basis, and then we received some information late yesterday after some multiple outreaches to MedStar. And so I'd be open to discussion on what you guys are thinking about funding for ambulances this year.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Barth.
surprise, I'm going to speak. I think that the ambulances do need an increase, and I think that it's been several years, and I think they've done their due diligence as far as reaching out to the other communities to raise money. And recognizing also that it is a tight budget year, I think they've currently been getting 50,000. They've asked for 65. I think we should go to 60 at least. And as far as the tardy ambulance, I think that we should reserve judgment on it until we're partway through the year, and maybe hold that other 15,000 that we don't give the incumbent ambulances on the side in case we need to supplement.
Any other thoughts? Commissioner
I partially agree with Jeff. I think that getting the application last night doesn't give us enough time to review it, so I think we need to take another look at it before we finalize a budget. But, and I have some questions that aren't answered at this point, to say the least. But I do agree that we do need to maybe increase the ambulance service support a little bit. We're looking at across the board kind of increase, but depending on how much we opt out for, if that happens, of somewhere around 6%, something like that. Numbers fluctuate right now. And I think we need to stay within a budget for any growth that we have for just about any organization that we're working with, especially we're not required to fund ambulance services, and I think we should do something. But we're gonna be spending a tremendous amount of money in public safety, but I still think we need to continue the ambulance support and maybe increase it incrementally by how much our budget's gonna go up, rather than just pick a number out of the sky and say that's what it should be. And I know that they're obviously a significant part of why we need to do something, so, with all the volunteers. The one thing that, when I look at all those applications, and I go through United Way budgets, those applications talk about, instead of just flat dollar amounts, they talk about what monies come locally, what monies frankly come in fundraisers, and there's a wide scope of conversations and results based on each community. And I think we need to get to some formula that says that a smaller community that raises a ton of money, so to speak, locally, maybe we should give them a little more credit for what they do, frankly. Not just flatly give a dollar amount. And I don't know where that's gonna go, but I think we ought to have that conversation again.
Commissioner Karski?
And Commissioner Benega, you used two numbers. You used 6%, and then you also said.
Off the top of my head, and I'm still
Okay.
trying to get awake yet this morning.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Yeah, or the percentage of that ARC budget is going up to, okay. And, you know, $60,000 is a lot of money, but just kind of a quick perusal of what we received from the ambulance. One ambulance staff 24/7 is $712,000 is the number that we're given. I mean, that, yeah, it's a drop in the bucket of what we're talking about, but it is, some help is better than no help, so.
That ambulance service runs their program completely different than the other ones.
In the rural ambulances,
Yes.
yes. Yep, I get that.
We're not comparing apples and apples, we're comparing apples and oranges.
Mhm.
We're only seeing
But-
part of the financial statement.
But our rural ambulances are still available 24/7,
Mm-hmm.
365.
Yep.
Commissioner Heiberger?
I agree with both Jeff and Commissioner Benega that I think there needs to be an increase. And I was looking at dollar amount too, but I like Commissioner Benega's idea better that we do a percentage when we figure out where we're at.
Okay, is that consensus?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
you know, if we're going to do it that way, maybe we should go back to where we instigated the 50,000 and index it all those years that we neglected to give them any increase. I mean, 50,000, 50,000, 50,000, now we're gonna give them, you know, 51,500. I mean, I think that, you know, certainly that Gerald's idea of indexing it to our budget is reasonable. But I think that we've left them out of any increase for so many years that we should consider taking a bit of a leap at this point and then indexing it going forward.
Personally, I'd like to give some increase, but it is a tough budget year, and I think that I'd be in support of indexing it this year. I'd like to put together a group. You know, we've had such great collaborative work on the ambulances to get together with our ordinances and things. I'd like to have that group this year look at funding and look at the ideas that Commissioner Benega brought up, look at ideas whether we should pay a flat fee to ambulance services for standby services, and come back with some kind of thoughtful discussion about that, so that we can look and put together some kind of plan going forward to, you know, this is a constant struggle. I mean, we've had years where we thought there was talk about not funding them at all, and so I think that it's an opportunity. That was the kind of one piece of the puzzle that didn't get attention as we were working on districting and ordinances and stuff, and I'd like to see some creative ideas brought back about how we could better and more fairly fund our ambulances in the future. Commissioner Karski.
If we're gonna go down that, I hate to call it a rabbit hole, but it kind of is one. One part of that conversation needs to be ambulance districts that all those communities need to consider funding their ambulances through an ambulance taxing district and taking care of themselves that way.
And I don't disagree. I think that has to be part of the funding discussion, so.
Madam Chair, we did actually have an ambulance task force back in, I don't know, 2004. And they did come up with that recommendation of a taxing district, and it went down. At the same time, you know, we're working on the budget right now. If we're going to appoint a task force that will report back, you know, by January 10th, it won't do anything for the budget next year. I think we should today decide what we're going to do for ambulance, and then go ahead and have a committee to examine funding possibilities. But the state is losing ambulances regularly, and once lost, especially a volunteer unit, it's never going to come back.
And I don't disagree. I wasn't suggesting we not raise it at all. I was suggesting that I agree with Commissioners Benega and Heiberger and maybe perhaps Karski, I'm not sure, that we increase it, we look at increasing it, tying it to our overall increase in our budget, and then we come back for next year so that we can see whether there are other better ways to do that. Okay? Any further discussion on that? Okay, that moves us to elected officials. I have one one idea I'd like to just kick off this discussion. In discussions yesterday with the auditor and Carol Muller, it was discovered that built in already to our budget is a 27th payroll payment for the elected officials, which they would not be entitled to since they're on a salary basis. And that is, Kim, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a little over 3% that's already built in. And we don't actually set elected officials' salaries until our first meeting of the year. So since there's already money in the budget, I think that would probably cover any increase that we'd likely be looking at, unless there's somebody here today that wants to advocate for higher than a 3-point-something% increase. I suggest we just go ahead and move forward, and then we can set the elected officials' salaries closer to the official meeting. Does that make sense to folks?
Madam Chair.
Okay.
So you're saying that because of the 27th pay period, that elected officials are salaried, that their increase would be that last?
I say that we have flexibility in the current budget numbers to give up to a 3-point-something% increase to elected officials. So I don't know that we actually have to decide, unless somebody wants to give a higher increase than that, which I hadn't heard anybody bandy that about, then I don't think we have to actually set elected officials' salaries today, because that's something we actually officially do on the first day of the commission year in January. Commissioner Barth.
I believe that is correct as far as commission salaries, but I don't believe that's where we set the sheriff and, auditor salaries, et cetera.
I'd look to Carrie. You might be right, Commissioner Barth.
Good morning. Commissioner Barth is correct that you set commission pay during the first meeting of the year. For the other elected department heads, we have to pass a resolution. We bring that to you in December, and that's when you would make any final decisions about what kind of pay to give for the upcoming year.
Okay. So we can wait until December. Thank you. It's good to have smart people around. Thank you. Okay, are we okay moving on then? So next item is the deliberation on new position requests. This is, this arguably in the opt-out is the real meat of our discussion here today. Every year, these are the decisions that we make that really affect the budget, because so much of our responsibilities are dictated by statute, and we don't have really a lot of spendable discretionary income. That's the truth of the matter. So I personally like how we have been doing the positions the last few years. It used to be that they were all dropped in and we had to go through and pull them out, and then the auditor's office was constantly having to rerun numbers and we had to figure out where we are. Now, just as a reminder, we have all the new position and staffing requests. None of these positions are in our budget right now, so when Kim showed us those numbers and showed you where we are as far as being a shortfall, any position that we delete or that we add in is we have to, did I get that right? Now I think I'm confusing myself. So it makes a difference, and I think what I'd like to do is open it up for discussion, and I think the most effective way to do this personally is if we just talk about positions that at this point the commission is not in favor of funding for next year. I think that is the easiest way to see what we need to do to reduce our number to get to a number that we're comfortable with for an opt-out. Does that make sense to folks? Commissioner Heiberger.
Question, are we going to talk about the new position requests on the top of the page, or are we going to talk about the whole page?
I think the whole page is in play. I don't see any reason to do it differently. Commissioner, or Carol, did you have a question?
No, I was just gonna bring the page up for you, but I never
Okay.
remember the commission login.
I got it.
Well, I can start this firebomb
Okay.
because it's not going to be any fun.
Sure, yep, you bet.
I'm liaison to the treasurer's office, so I'm sure I will be in the doghouse now, but I don't think we should approve any of those. I think that there are other solutions in that office that we have talked about, and I think until we've looked at some of those other solutions, that I do not feel like we should be putting 3 more staff in that office. Yesterday, I mentioned that the bank reconciliations have not been done. There are some other things in there that could be changed to try to improve the flow of that office. I think there's definitely a different direction between how the elected official treasurer wants to do things and what we think might be some ideas. And I think until we kind of come to some kind of consensus, that I would be in favor of scratching those 3 positions.
Question
Commissioner
for
Barth?
Cindy, is that reconciliation required by statute? Is that,
Yes, I believe it is, so, and it's a
Oh.
year behind.
okay, thank you.
If I may.
Commissioner Karski?
You know, when I looked at this list and listened to the testimony of department heads and staff about justifications, excuse me, one of the, or the strongest consideration I give is, on the efficiency side. I listened to equalization and Chris, and the need for a vehicle would make staff more efficient, or the public defender's office saying that I don't want my attorneys doing my legal assistant or my paralegal work. So give me help so I can keep my people that are doing the jobs they're supposed to be doing. And that's where I give a lot of weight to when I give consideration to these things. So when it comes to this, I kind of narrowed the list down, and I know when it comes to the sheriff's office and the need for 13 staff there, that one's kind of a given that we really have to look at. And considering the whole thing, I kind of narrowed my list down to a total of 19, down from 26. And I'm in favor of the vehicle for the equalization, a new one and a replacement one. I'd like to hold off on the appraiser and training for right now. And I'll echo along those same lines then what Commissioner Heiberger said with the treasurer's office. Show me that where you're working with efficiencies, with technology, and where you can put people in the proper place so that we get the job done efficiently, not just throw more staff in there.
Okay, so far I've heard support for eliminating the 3 positions, not eliminating, but not funding the 3 positions in the treasurer's office. Is there anybody that feels differently about that? Can we just mark those off?
Well, Madam Chair, I think we could mark them off, but I would say I think there's been consideration to putting in a kiosk where people could renew their tags in this building. And if after some months we may find that we don't need 3 people, maybe we still might need 1, and I think we should keep that in mind.
And I think we always look at staff requests mid-year if there's a compelling reason to do that. I think we have confirmed that a kiosk would work in this building, provided that the state approved that, and that's at no cost to us. So I do agree that that's something we should try. The GovTech program, I know we're working on getting those folks in to do a demonstration for the commission. That's another option that we explored. So I do think that, we need to run through those opportunities for, possibly creating more efficiencies in that office. And if there's a compelling reason after those have been tried, that we would look at that the way we look at any request mid-year. And we have a history of doing that. So, okay, so equalization, is there anybody that is opposed to not funding the equalization position this year? This is a difficult situation where we're dealing in priorities, and so for me, for this coming year, this is not as compelling as a priority as some of the, unfortunately, where most of our money tends to go into the public safety realm. So I don't disagree that there's need in the office, but I don't think it's one of the highest priorities for this coming year.
Madam Chair, I think that we are looking at a 3% increase for our staff. And, you know, would you rather have another employee or a raise? I think that the employees that are here would rather have a raise. Governor Janklow used to tell a story about when he was Attorney General and he had 17 secretaries, and when they quit, he raised their salaries of the remaining ones and returned part of the money to the state, part of the money raising their salaries, and he got down to 5 secretaries, down from 17, and boy, could they kick butt.
Sounds like a classic Governor Janklow story, so.
Maybe he made it up, I don't know.
Okay, so other
Would-
thoughts?
I would agree with Commissioner Bender on the equalization issue, and I think we need to also realize that we're capped by how much revenue we're gonna generate, even by adding staff. The 3% is the max, along with any growth, and we are keeping up with the growth. They're working hard, but we're also changing software packages to make that more efficient. So I think I would like to try that for a year without adding staff.
Okay. Other positions?
I just have a question of clarification. So on the top, we have,
This is gonna be for you, Mike.
on the top, we have for the sheriff's office, we have a correctional officer at the top, and then at the bottom, we have, for the jail, and then at the bottom, we have another 12. So are they different?
Kim, maybe if you, Kim or
So I'm just
Carrie,
don't
one
know
of
why
the two
there's
of you,
13.
if you could come up. Are you looking at the most recent one that
Yep,
was
I'm
posted on
looking at-
Dropbox?
Yep. So there's one on the top, Kim, and then there's 12 below. I don't know why those are separated out.
I still have some.
Oh, thank you.
And then those positions that are down in that bottom section, those are all staggered hires through the year, so those
But
are
this-
just a partial year.
Does the budget reflect partial year of those?
Yes, that
It-
revised
it-
one
It
does.
does,
Okay.
yes.
So, as the sheriff pointed out, the position on the top, the new positions requested full year is a correctional officer. It's a court security position that the sheriff's office has requested. And that is in addition to the new correctional officers that are going to be hired one half on April 1st and one half on September 1st.
I don't want to use a total brush stroke on the new positions, but I think the public safety related departments frankly need our support with the additional staff. I don't have that same gut feeling that we have to do the things that are non-public safety, so that would maybe eliminate the equalization, the human services, and the treasurer's office. We're doing some of those things currently. We have replaced current staff, and I really feel like with the change in software packages that we've implemented, we should become more efficient, and we need time to make that implementation work. So that's kind of where I'm just doing a broad brush conversation, if you will.
That's kind of where my numbers are, excuse me, Commissioner.
No, that's fine.
But I would also suggest, or would like to discuss, that for the state's attorney's office, he has a legal office assistant in his request, but I would like to make that now I forgot the title. It would be an assistant to the state's attorney himself and to the civil office. I think they desperately need someone to help answer the emails, answer the phones, and I think that that's where that position needs to go. So,
Okay, so if there's no further discussion about equalization, human services, or treasurer's office, I would like to thank the human services department for being creative and coming up with ways to repurpose a position so that the Alliance caseworker position is going to be handled, and I really thank you for that. So,
May-
Commissioner
Chair, if I
Karski?
could, Human Services also wanted to convert one part-time to a full-time.
And I was assuming that that's what Commissioner Benega was talking about, not funding.
Right.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Okay.
Okay, so now we're into public safety for the most part, and we might as well just have the hard decisions there. And I think that let's start with the state's attorney's office. They've asked for the most positions, and I'm curious about thoughts as to what, if any, of those positions folks here think we should fund. Commissioner Heiberger suggested that we fund the legal office assistant. I'm curious about other thoughts.
Commissioner Benega, or Bender?
Yes.
I would just finish out the notes that I made, and then we can discuss it from there, because I'm Aaron's liaison this year. And for his office, I would like to see one state's attorney's position, which is 94. I would like to see 2 discovery people put in there. We do have a volunteer that has left. And so basically, if we put 1 in there, we're only replacing the one that we had, and we're still not catching up. So I would suggest a paralegal position, and then the administrative assistant for Aaron, one of those. And those were my requests for that office.
Commissioner Benega?
I just have a concept problem, to be honest, and I'm not criticizing anybody, but we have good people who manage departments, and I think it's their decision. We need to fund what we think we can afford to fund. Let them make the decisions about how they organize, how they become more efficient, how they're more effective. That's what we're paying them for. I don't want to micromanage their, quote, management responsibilities, because frankly, I don't think that's our job.
So are you suggesting, Commissioner Benega, because I know we've done this in the past, and it's a thought that I had, that we allocate a dollar amount to the
Correct.
state's attorney's office and let
Yep.
the state's attorney decide how he would like to utilize those funds?
Yes.
Did you have a dollar amount you wanted to toss out there?
I leave it at the dollar amount that's been requested. What the title is, how it works out financially, that's gonna be something that Mr. McGowan's gonna have to work out.
So the 4 positions, the total dollar amount for the requested positions.
Correct.
I agree with
Actually,
you.
yeah, there is 4.
Yes, I think
I
there are
agree
more
with the 4. Can we add the funding for the additional person in digital discovery? So there would be 2, because he did ramp down from 2 to 1, and I think we still need 2. And I'm fine with the dollar amount thing. Aaron can work through those positions. I just would like to see us give him the dollar amount for that second
So
discovery person.
you,
So I would say the
he's
4.
asking for 1 and
He's
you're
asking for 7
suggesting-
positions,
Yeah.
just to
Yes.
be clear.
I thought it was 4.
He's got 2 attorneys, 2 digital discovery techs, a paralegal, a legal office assistant,
No, I know.
and the diversion coordinator.
Yep.
They show up in different places because he had offered up to phase them in over time.
Yep.
Yeah,
No,
so.
I agree with that.
So, I mean, I would personally be in favor of allocating the amount of money for the 4 highest paid positions. So giving him the amount of money that would be equal to 2 attorneys, and I believe the 2 discovery tech positions, and let him decide how he would like to allocate those funds. Commissioner Heiberger.
I have another comment, and just I didn't think about this, but on the bottom is the diversion coordinator. That needs to just stay in there, because that basically pays for itself. So I'd like to take that out of the conversation, because that pays for itself with funding that comes back through diversion.
We had some long conversations about that yesterday, and there was some debate between the auditor's office and Carol and me, who doesn't know anything about it hardly. But Kim thought that that maybe $20,000 needed to stay in, that might not be, hasn't been necessarily funded in the past, with the idea that maybe if the diversions are super successful, that might be covered. But for right now, that was the number Kim had thrown out yesterday. So we could eliminate basically the cost of $47,500 and leave $20,000 in there possibly as our share of what that might cost.
So can that 20,000 stay in that budgeted amount?
Yes, if we're trying to get down to a number for purposes of opt-out, we
Okay.
could take out 47.5 425 out of that we basically saved in costs. Does that make sense, Kim?
So
That's-
you're leaving the $20,000 in for the diversion. My question is, we're funding, you're giving him the money for the top four, and you're giving him the extra 20,000 for
Right,
the diversion
yes.
officer? Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I would still advocate that we need to put another money in there for one more digital discovery person.
And I
No, just two.
yeah, that's what I was advocating for.
Okay, okay.
So the phased-in approach that he's offered up, the
Okay.
dollar amount that would be equal to the 2 attorneys,
Okay,
which were phased in, and the 2 digital discovery techs that were phased in. So the amount of money shown on this latest sheet for attorneys and the digital discovery techs, that amount of money would be allocated to the state's attorney's office and allow them to decide how to spend that money, how they see fit.
plus the $20,000.
Plus the
for-
20,000 for the diversion. Thank you. Yeah,
It's
the
still-
diversion coordinator, I believe, stays. I would recommend staying.
One more comment.
So we don't support the idea of a paralegal going over there?
I would go with Commissioner Benniger's approach that the state's attorney can decide what he thinks is the best way to spend those funds.
His request is already in the numbers we discussed, and my suggestion was we leave the numbers the same from a dollar standpoint, and how he decides to allocate those dollars and use them is his responsibility. When you take the top group of new positions and add the other staffing request phased in, we're making that a priority. But we're not going through and line item making job description evaluations on how he should run his office. We're letting him do that.
So just to be clear, and I think Kim, you tracking with me what I'm suggesting here? Okay.
So we're leaving the funding in for the 2 state's attorney, the 2 digital discovery technicians, and the diversion coordinator.
Right. So can you update us with our numbers or where we are?
We are at a budget shortfall of $1,978,000.
Okay, thank you. So that leaves us with the Public Defender's Office to discuss, and then the Sheriff's Office. So why don't we do Public Defender's Office since we just finished the State's Attorney's Office? Thoughts there? I was very appreciative of the requests made by the Public Defender's Office and really creatively looking and talking to our staff about what would be the best bang for the buck, what would help them the most to move cases through their office. So I am personally in favor of funding the legal office assistant request. And I'm, I think I'd go ahead and, at this point, fund the part-time legal office assistant as well.
I would agree.
Okay. All right, and so then we are at the sheriff's office, and I think I haven't heard anybody advocate that the correctional officers that we had on our radar since we approved the jail would be approved. And so that takes us to the question of the correctional officer for court security and the reclassification of the deputy sheriff to sergeant. I think, is anybody that has any problem with reclassifying the deputy sheriff to sergeant? I think that is a reasonable request. Makes sense. All right, so what about courthouse security? Thoughts about that? You okay? Anybody have concerns about funding that position?
I guess just curious. We're adding a new position there, and this might be a silly question, but we're not adding additional entry points or anything like that. over the last several years, we've been getting by with the people that we've had there. Why now do we need an additional one?
Warden Gromer or Sheriff? You guys could flip coins back there and see who gets to come up. Warden Gromer's got that good golf tan going. He's got to come up.
Fortunately, I took my hat off for a while yesterday, so I don't have. What we're seeing with that position is just an increased volume at the courthouse. When, with the numbers of probationers that are rising and the numbers of probation violations that are occurring, that repeatedly pulls one of the court security staff from the duties at the front entrance or from monitoring or providing security for a courtroom because they have to transport that individual to jail, or they have to take custody of that individual from probation. The other thing we're seeing is a lot more court hearings. We're having security requested in that particular court hearing, which is also pulling someone from the security details at the front desk, and we're running short. This has been a conversation we've had internally amongst the sheriff's office for a couple, 2 or 3 years now, and at this point, it's continuing to grow to the point where we felt necessary to make the request this year.
The perception I had was that this is just dedicated there, but you're saying it's well beyond that.
It's
and
beyond
that's-
that front desk check-in.
Okay.
What we, try to do is have, 3 people around there, 2 to work that front desk, and then 1 is running from these other places to the next, and we're just getting spread so thin.
Okay.
The other side of this that we're having more and more difficulty each year is finding part-time staff to cover those shifts, and finding reliable part-time staff who wants to work that fixed schedule is just becoming more and more difficult. We have 1 part-time vacancy now that we just have not been able to find much interest to fill. And then projecting we're gonna have another one coming up later toward the end of this year with a part-time staff that we're gonna have a hard time filling those hours as well.
Thank
So
you.
Would
Oh.
you be eliminating any part-time positions then?
I think there would be a reduction in part-time. I didn't reduce it in the budget this year. I looked at it this morning quick before I came over to see if we would have enough part-time savings to just swap the money, and I don't think it's quite there. We would be able to make some reduction in part-time hours with the addition of a full-time staff member in that, but it's not a one-for-one trade. I don't think I can get, when we start to add the benefit package and some of the increased costs of a full-time staff, I don't think I can get that total amount reduced from my part-time
I
budget.
wouldn't imagine. Okay.
So.
Thank you. Thoughts on that position? I think given the recent shooting we had in our parking lot and the, folks that go through the jail, those people over there are busy. I think it makes sense to go ahead and fund that position.
I'm okay with it.
I would say that when I asked, I think a week or so, whatever time frame ago, to look at comp time comparisons of staff, the only one that I thought had a little bit of comp time that would make sense to hire additional staffing from a non-exempt or an exempt status was the sheriff's office. So I think that that's reasonable. The rest of the comp time that I saw from other departments, that I know everybody's trying to hold that down, that makes sense, but there's an ability to fund a little bit of comp time and overtime. And I think that also led me to the conversation about what priorities we ought to be supporting and which ones we shouldn't.
Okay. I've noticed that I miss facilities. So, and JDC, sorry, that's my bad, so.
With facilities, they were talking coming in halfway through the year anyway, so what was the dollar amount for that?
$42,453.
Oh, okay.
I am liaison to both of those, and obviously I'm gonna support both of those. Facilities is doing more and more internal work than what we've contracted for in the past. And we're adding to the campus, so to speak, which is a responsibility of facilities. The other thing that we take for granted on occasion is the amount of time that he spends at the fair, especially managing some of the operational issues there. And JDC did delay the hiring of that particular person for training-related issues. So I would be in favor of leaving those two positions as requested as a delayed hire.
Thoughts?
Not delaying them till halfway through the year.
As requested on our staffing request, both the facilities person would start on May 1st and the JDC person would start on July 1st.
Okay. And we're really not adding a facilities person, we're just funding a position that's been there for
Correct.
quite
Right,
some
yeah.
time.
I'm fine with facilities. I'm wondering, Jamie here, can Jamie speak just briefly about his position again? I know he's talked before, but.
This is a position that we gave up a while back, and we tried to split it through 3 or 4 people, and it's just becoming overwhelming for some of those people to continue in that role. We're also ramping up for an expected mandate from the federal government on use of confinement, and there's going to be a ton of training that goes along with that. So we're trying to be prepared for when that mandate comes to us. And like I originally said, it's needed in 2021 for sure if I don't get it this year, but I'd be willing to even go back to September 1st for the hire, as long as we can be prepared for that mandate as it comes.
That was actually my thought, was wondering if you could kick it back to September, so.
Yeah, I can kick it back till September. I'm just trying to get it in place so we're prepared for the push in 2021.
Any other thoughts on that?
Someone's got to train the trainer.
You're okay with the September start date though?
I am.
Okay. Well, I think that gets us all the way through at least a first discussion. Kim, if you could,
There's a reclassification on the bottom.
the reclassification of the deputy sheriff to the sergeant?
Mhm.
Oh, I thought we talked about that.
Sorry.
Yeah,
missed
that's
it.
okay. No, that's okay. It is kind of hard to keep track of all these.
Okay.
And I didn't go in order, so that might have been my bad. I'm going to give the auditor and Kim a little bit of time and have her update. I think our number's going to be a little higher than I had hoped.
Can I make a comment?
Commissioner Karski, yeah, absolutely.
Part of the conversation that was ongoing with the state's attorney's office about give them the money, let them put the right people in there. I agree with that approach. And when I look at our state's attorney and our public defender, while our state's attorney is elected, our public defender is appointed, they both run very large operations. I mean, the number of staff within those operations I don't believe the state's attorney has an administrative assistant. You know, we have great attorneys in both our state's attorney and our public defender and in their staff, but we're asking them to run large operations with 30, 40 people in them or more probably, and to give them the flexibility to decide, hey, I really should have an administrative assistant to allow me to be an attorney, because both Aaron and Tracy are in court regularly, and it's the number of staff they're managing and the operation they're running is just, I think it's appropriate that we give them the latitude to find those people that can help them better manage the tasks that they've been given with the operation that they have.
Okay.
Encourage them to come to us with that type of a proposal if that's necessary. So,
All right. Kim, do you want to update us where we are right now?
Just to recap, there were 20 new positions then approved, 13 in the jail and 7 in the other departments. Then we also included funding for a facilities position that's already built in unfunded, and a reclassification of a deputy sheriff to sergeant. deferred hire dates on a number of positions, and the impact of deferring those hire dates is about $512,000. Okay, so that will be a built-in cost to 2021. But these adjustments then are gonna bring our projected shortfall to $1,948,323.
Less than 2
1 million.
minimum.
$1,948,000.
What's the total general fund budget then?
That brings total appropriations to $64,504,773.
Which is an increase of how much money from last year? Just roughly,
3.
$3 million.
about 5% then. Okay. Was only 1% off when I guessed then.
You're amazing.
You know, I'm just lucky.
All right, so, is everybody comfortable with where we are? New positions? That takes us to the ever-popular opt-out discussion. Commission, yeah, Carol, is that why I
No.
wasn't sure if that's why you're
No,
here.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to insert that, because I know department heads will ask this afterwards, any direction on vehicles that's out there. And are the 6 sheriff's cars already in the budget?
I thought
Okay.
all the vehicles were in the budget.
Vehicles.
Are in, and I did eliminate the vehicle tied to the equalization position.
So they get the one vehicle they'd asked for, they just don't get the new vehicle that went with the position.
No.
There was a replacement vehicle as well, so there's really 2 vehicles
Yeah.
involved
Yep.
in their request.
Okay.
Remaining.
Remaining, okay.
And we do have the facilities in for 25,000 for pickup, JDC for a transfer from highway, and emergency management also?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure, because they're going to ask afterwards.
Commissioner Heiberger?
Are we gonna talk about doing, enterprise? Or did that discussion just go away? Now we're talking about putting there's a bunch of cars in the budget, and so I'm just wondering where that went to do fleet management.
Madam Chair, I for one am not supportive of the enterprise contract. I do think we learned a lot more about these things, and the idea of having new vehicles which are safer, I think, is a reasonable concern. And so, on the one hand, buying a new vehicle is probably better for a department than getting, a used dump truck from the highway department. But I don't like the idea of, it just was too difficult for me to understand perhaps on the enterprise rent-a-car deal.
I don't think it has any significant financial application for next year if we do part of it. And I'm willing to still do part of it because I believe that there's a group of vehicles that it does make sense for, but not the total projections that they brought to us. I mean, that projection has changed twice, I think, or 3 times.
At least, yeah.
So I think we can look at it again and maybe pick and choose and do a test run for a year, but I don't think it has any impact on, frankly, a $64 million budget.
Commissioner Karski?
I'm in favor of keeping the discussion ongoing, but how many vehicles were we talking about total if we excluded the sheriff's office? We had 1 fleet management, 2 in equalization, 1 in facilities,
One at JDC also.
so a total of 5. And how much are those 5 vehicles?
$127,000.
Okay, so if we didn't buy 5 vehicles next year and we just leased them at a cost of, say, $4,000 a vehicle, we're going from 127 down to 20,000. I mean, that's a $100,000 impact on our budget.
That's not totally accurate because there's gonna be replacements. We're gonna get some value in the sale, I think.
But my point is that we're not buying them, we're leasing them at an annual leasing cost versus a one-time purchase cost.
And I would agree with you, other than the fact that we've had 2 or 3 proposals and each one of those has been different. So I think we need to have some firm numbers before we make a black and white commitment.
And I also noted that they're not even, haven't gotten their license in South Dakota yet. They're not here to, so I think, I agree. I think this is something that we could have further conversation about. I'm gonna let Craig say something if he had a comment you want to make.
Well, it's more of a question, just I think you were in the process of providing the direction for me to get some more information as far as concrete numbers, but would appreciate any further clarification so I can get you the information that you need.
Okay, Commissioner Heiberger?
At this point, I'm in favor of doing some type of fleet management thing. I think it's a good idea. I agree, we need more numbers. I forgot what my point was. Oh, the amount of money that we have in the budget right now, we can refine that later then. Because
Correct.
we're not gonna need that much money if we do the fleet management
Right.
possibly.
I
So-
don't think making a decision here today about
Okay,
personnel
Cars.
and overall budget closes that door. I think we have an opportunity to continue to look at it. And I think, Craig, we will give you some direction. I think that we would probably, maybe Commissioner Benega and I'll sit down with you. We'll fine tune exactly what we think we would need to know to be able to make a decision, and we'll bring back one more presentation to the commission. Commissioner Heiberger?
I think it's just safe to say, Carol, that you can tell staff there will be cars. We just don't know what cars or how cars.
Correct. I think that's very fair. So, cars are good things.
Madam Chair?
Commissioner
I
Barth?
wonder if, as we adjusted our new hire numbers, if we adjusted our, laptops and office desks and travel, training, et cetera. I know it's nickel and diming, but.
No, I think the auditors, my understanding is that that has been included for new staff, but I would defer to Kim Adamson. That has been included, yep. So they'll have, they might be in a closet somewhere, but they will have a computer. So that's facilities is another topic that we are going to be tackling here next month, so. Okay. Now that takes us to opt-out, I believe. And,
Madam Chair, I think
Chair
it's
Barth?
clear that we're going to need to opt out. And I know that the last time we opted out, I think we did for $3.5 million for 20 years. And we didn't spend all that money. We did, the first year, I think we took $1 million. The next year, and Kim can tell me more here. Kim, how did we allocate that opt-out money? We took $1 million the first year,
We took $1.5 million in the first 2 years, and then we jumped up to 2.6 million, and then we took the last
chunk.
600,000,
Yeah.
which is this past.
And so I think
budget
that
cycle.
the public needs to understand that, the number that we opt out for isn't necessarily the number that we're going to grab every year. And we hope not to opt out as often as we, every year. Although I think that, I've said before that 3% or the rate of inflation, whichever is lower, it should be 3% or the rate of inflation, whichever is higher, and then we wouldn't have this kind of problem on a regular basis. Our costs go up more than 3% on, in so many areas. So I would recommend that we opt out for a number greater than what we need hand to mouth. Those of us that have spent some time living paycheck to paycheck know that it's better to have $5 in your wallet. So I'm willing to listen to what numbers we might need. And I think that Kim told me that a $100,000 house, $1 million is $6.47.
$6.70.
And 70? Okay, so a $200,000 dollar house, it's really not that huge an increase for $1 million. And let's discuss the numbers.
I think I'm going to go ahead and let Kim, Kim did some general fund projections for us that were on Dropbox, and I don't know that we've seen something exactly like this before, so I think it would be helpful if you just explain a little bit of some of the assumptions that went into this, and I think it will help inform a discussion a little bit.
Sure. This chart is just meant to illustrate the trajectory of our projected revenues and operating expenses, starting with 2020 and looking out 5 years. We did a variation of this projection a couple years ago when we engaged the fan committee to evaluate our budget needs. And at that time, we were projecting a potential need of 7.9 million by 2023. If you look at this chart, I'll go through some of the basic assumptions, but this chart is now showing that we would need an opt-out of about 6.3 million by 2023. And the main reason for that change is that we have been able, as we've come closer to the opening of the jail, opening up the jail expansion, we've been able to fine-tune our assumptions for what units we will occupy and staff, and that has, we've been able to greatly reduce our operating costs because we're shifting to different staffing levels than what were originally built into those projections a year and a half ago. But I will talk a little bit about the projections that are built in here. The line on the chart represents our total projected expenditures by year. So if you look at 2020, the chart's showing slightly more expenses than what you've just approved through your deliberations today, but not enough to really change the trajectory of these projections. Then the bar below shows the different components of revenue that we have. So the blue section represents our revenue that's not tied to property taxes. The green bar is our base property tax revenue. The darker orange portion of the bar is the current opt-out level, which is at $9,625,000, and that does not change through this projection. And then the top portion of that bar represents the additional opt-out that would be needed in order to fund our projected expenses. So it's showing we'd need 2.1 million in 2020, which now after your deliberations, we're at about $1,950,000. By 2022, we'll be at 5.3 million. All the way out to 2025, we could be as high as 9 million. Some of the assumptions used in building these projections, on the revenue side, we've assumed that we will rent 60 beds in the jail, and that we have built in 2% increases per year for the bed rate that would be charged to our participants renting beds. Our other revenue sources, we've increased at a rate of 1% a year. Property taxes are built in at an overall growth rate of 4%, representing 3% growth and 1% CPI. On the expenditure side, the biggest costs, of course, are matrix adjustments and the cost of new hires. So for the first 3 years, 2020 through 2022, there's a 3% matrix built in, 1.5% for the years further out. New hires, we've built in staffing to occupy the jail at the levels necessary to rent those 60 beds and serve our projected inmate population. The other new hires factored in are the equivalent of about 8 positions per year. In addition, we've built in an 8% insurance increase, and I've built in the amount for step increases that are inflated at the same rate as the projected matrix adjustments. So that just gives you an idea of how we're coming up with these numbers. But I guess what this is meant to illustrate is how long various opt-out levels would be able to fund our operations.
Commissioner Heiberger?
I have 2 questions.
Sure.
In 2021, so you're at 3,131,000, so it's basically $1 million more the next year, and does that take into account the fact that we're gonna have $1 million because we don't have 27 pay periods?
It does. It also takes into account the extra 500,000 we'll have when we annualize the deferred hires for 2020.
Other questions?
Madam Chair, so
Commissioner Barth?
it looks like if we opted out for, what is the number we need this year? It's 2 million.
About $1,950,000.
Right. Then we'd still have to opt out for another couple million next year, and another couple million the year after that. And I don't think it's prudent for us to lock us into making difficult decisions that are necessary for our county, the greatest county in the state of South Dakota. We should plan for the future, work with the legislature. We need to get, 3% and not just the rate of inflation. In fact, I'm concerned that inflation is going to increase and our costs are going to increase. So we need to plan to opt out for sufficient monies to take us, I think, to 2023, and that number looks something like $6.5 million. And that doesn't mean we take $6.5 million every year, but we would take $2 million in 2020 and maybe $4 million in 2021 potentially. But I think that if we do this opt-out and keep an eye on the ball and again work with the legislature, I think that that will get us through the next couple of years. Opting out is nobody's favorite thing, although, well, I can go on and on. But so I think we should look at doing a number to take us to 2023.
Other thoughts? Commissioner Karski.
Partially agree. I think we need to look at least 2 years down the road. One of the problems with opt-out money is it is not indexed for inflation. We have to say we're going to opt out for 20, 30, or 99 years if we wanted to. But that opt-out never goes up in value. It's not indexed for inflation like our taxes are. I think there are legislative things that can and probably will have to be done. These are scary numbers, and we're told by our legislators, if you need to fix your budget, opt out. Well, that's what we have to do. I'm more in favor of a number in that let's take us through the next 2 years and let's see what happens legislatively. And as time goes on, if it is every second or third year that we have to opt out, I'm okay with that. So I'm thinking more of a number in that $3.5 or $4 million range to cover the budget we're talking about, and the next year to have that reserve there if we need it, and possibly a little bit of carryover into 2022 if we can stretch it that far.
Other thoughts?
Madam Chair, you've heard me say this before, but I remember talking to Dusty Johnson when he was chief assistant for Governor Dugard, talking about our budget issues, and Dusty said, well, just opt out. And when I talked to the legislators, they said, just opt out. And I talked to Chief Justice Gilbertson in his office because he had given outside attorneys a 3% raise, and he said, just opt out. The people in Pierre think it's simple. They won't do it. They won't fund the penitentiary enough to keep the criminals incarcerated. They won't fund the human services down in Yankton in order to take care of the mentally ill and otherwise disabled. They won't fund Redfield. And what happens? They let these people out of the penitentiary and they stay here until they go to the big house that we are putting another $50 million into. The state has abdicated their responsibilities. And I can tell you this, that it's one party that has done that in Pierre. One party that controls all of it, and they're saying opt out. So if we're doing our job, we're doing what they tell us to do, let's opt out.
Kim, could you share the projections you've made with us in writing, or send us an email so we have that for future use? Because your numbers have obviously always been pretty close. So I want to, first of all, say thank you for all you guys' work and Vicky's work and everybody else, all the department heads and everybody else, because this is a significant project. And frankly, a couple of weeks ago, I asked for a cash applied analysis on your revenue projections and your expense projections, and we've been pretty close to 1% of what budget we've put together in the last few years, which is amazing. So thank you for everything you guys do. That's awesome. I don't know that you can make great projections longer than 3 years.
Right.
And I'm not saying you couldn't, but I can't. In fact, I can't remember what happened last year.
The only thing that's certain is that these are probably gonna be wrong.
True.
The question is by how much?
I think the financial analysis network that we had give us some information a year ago, or whatever it
A
was.
couple years ago.
17, 2 years ago, suggested that we were going to be in this position and that we were going to be close to some of these numbers that you have projected. So the only issue for me is how many years do we go out? And I'm thinking that it should be 3 to 5, because I don't think we're going to make a whole lot of difference in these, and you've already projected some growth and some revenue, some inflation, and we could argue whose problem it is, but it's our problem, so we gotta take care of it. And we're not keeping up with public safety related issues that this community is struggling with. And frankly, I think quality of life is associated with this, so I'm more into that, at least 3, but more like 4 or 5.
One statistic I'll share with you, not that it really weighs in on your decision here, but an additional 2 million opt-out in 2020 equates to about 26% of our levied taxes. And on these projections, by 2023, we'll be opting out for over 32% of our tax revenue, and 2025, over 36% of our tax revenue. So it is an issue that will continue to escalate over time.
Yeah, I mean, there's just no arguing with the numbers that the legislature is not adequately funding counties through their funding formula. And so if we can't adjust that, then as has been stated, this is the option that is left to us. And we were very clear last year when we chose not to opt out and got by on the remaining opt-out that we had left, that this year opting out was probably not an option. I mean, that was a given. And I'm probably a little bit more in Commissioner Benega's camp. I think there's no doubt we're going to need opt-outs. And I'm also confident, based on a pretty long track record of how this commission has been, we're pretty frugal, and we don't utilize opt-out unless we have to, and we agonize over it, even though we already have it. It's not like we spend it. We agonize every year over new positions and how we're going to spend it. And so I would be more, I was kind of coming into today thinking it'd be somewhere in the 3 to 5 years of opt-out. And I mean, I'd be comfortable going with Commissioner Barth's approach and doing a $6.5 million opt-out. I mean, not comfortable in the sense happy. I won't be doing a happy dance about it, but I would be, I think that is reasonable given what clearly history is showing us that the trend line that Kim is presenting is not, might not be exactly accurate, but it's probably, I mean, we're trending in that direction, so.
Madam Chair, so at this point, would we want to make a decision? I like the idea of 6.5 and over 3 years, and then let's see if what happens when we finalize and how much we actually take, because I don't think we will take more than is absolutely necessary. And right now, we're looking at, I think it is 1.9 for next year's budget, so that would still give us the latitude to make it through the next few years. So do you want a motion? I would make a
No,
motion.
I mean, we would put this, I mean, we'll have an actual vote on an opt-out. I would like to probably do that. I mean, as long as we kind of come to some consensus here today, I would do that at our next at our next commission meeting likely. Commissioner Benning, or Hyperger, sorry.
Hadn't weighed in, I thought I should at least weigh in, and you're right. I mean, these projections were great. I looked at them last night too, and we have been very fiscally conservative. I know the last time we did the opt-out, we agonized about how much to do, and I think we did a really good job of not spending that money all at once. And I would be hopeful that that's the way it would continue to be, is that we would just use it. And I was thinking 3 years, so I guess if we go between that 3 and 5, I'm fine with that too. We're not gonna use it, so, I mean, we're not gonna use it right away. We're going to be hanging on to just the ability, and it isn't any fun to do an opt-out, so.
Other thoughts? Other numbers?
One more,
For about 6 million.
Commissioner
I
Heiberger?
had one more question for Kim, and I'm sure you took care of this, but did you put in the 5% for ambulances?
In our projection, I actually put in 6,
Okay.
at Gerald's suggestion, 6. The impact was $9,000. It's not
Yeah.
a
it's
very
big
big ticket.
If I might, I think
Commissioner
that's the one disappointment that I have today is that we're not taking our budget increases of the last few years and directing it towards the ambulance people. And that said, I think we are working hard and made some tough decisions which probably tick off a whole bunch of our staff and are going to upset citizens, and hopefully my wife will let me come home tonight.
We all hope so.
Do you have any room at your house?
So as far as a final number, I want to make sure we're on consensus. 6.5 million?
We can argue the number forever, and
Yeah.
it's just gonna be
We just
mute
need to give-
based on whatever happens in the next few years, so.
Yep.
All right.
One other decision point is the length of the opt-out. We had been opting out for 20 years, up until 2015, when you passed the opt-out. The $3.5 million opt-out was for 25 years. Dean pointed out that opt-out really kind of loses its
Financial.
financial impact over time, because we don't get growth or CPI on those dollars. So extending the term of the opt-out doesn't really gain us much, because it becomes it's worth less and less as time goes on.
And
So
with
you'll
that,
just need to think about what length of opt-out you want to pass.
When's the first or the oldest opt-out gonna be dropping off?
That will drop off in 2027, I believe.
So just beyond that, how much is that opt-out for?
It's $1.6 million.
Ouch, okay. So that's, 7 years down the road, that's that much more that we have to add on to
Ante
that.
up, yep.
Mhm.
And the truth of that matter is if we renew that opt-out, it's not a tax increase to folks. It's where it would just keep their taxes where they were, so.
Exactly.
Yep.
Pose a problem, though, for future commissions when, suddenly you have multi-million-dollar potential hole in your budget. And
So thoughts about length?
I don't understand why we just don't do it for more, because it's not like you're not going to need it, even if the value isn't the same.
Lining.
I mean, you can do it for 99 years, and maybe that sounds ridiculous, but I don't know why you wouldn't do it for more than 25 years. I don't understand why we cap it.
I think that's some accountability to taxpayers that, who knows, we can't project numbers with any certainty more than 3 years. The world is certainly a lot different place today than it was 20 or 25 years ago. So I think that shows responsibility to taxpayers, that if we cap it at 20 or 25 years, it shows that there's going to be some accountability. This isn't just a forever kind of deal. We're going to relook at it and see how the world has changed, and maybe the triage center and the drug courts and the mental health courts, and maybe they'll all start moving the needle, and we'll make the kind of progress we'd like to see to get people healthy and working and taking care of their families. So I'm not Pollyannish enough to think that we aren't always going to have struggles, but I think it just gives us an opportunity to be accountable to taxpayers and relook at where things are at the time.
I'm okay with 25.
I think you pick a date and that's fine.
I'll be 92 at that point and won't know what it is.
Taxes, though,
Yeah.
so. Okay, 25 years. All right, so I'm gonna look to Carol now. The next thing on the agenda was provisional budget. Is there anything in particular you need us to do?
I'll just recap dates for you.
Okay,
Because the good news is the hard work is done, and you guys have been incredible about making this push through, and also the department heads. So you have to have, the opt-out has to be approved by July 15th, so you've got between now and July 15th when you want to go through and approve that opt-out. So if there's direction from the commission, we will go ahead
yeah,
and get that.
I think we do it at our next commission meeting. I think our decisions have, we vetted it out. I don't see any reason
Okay.
to wait.
We will go
So,
ahead and get it on the calendar for
I will need to
June
call in.
Yeah.
28th.
Dean will too. There's a couple commissioners gone, but I've talked to them and they're willing to call in.
Thank
so,
you. Thank you.
Does need us all to be on it, I think.
Yeah,
July 23rd is the next time then you'll see the full budget in preparation for a July 30th adoption for the provisional budget. And there's very little tweaking that happens between now and then out of that. On August 27th, you'll have the hearings for museum, library, and 911 presentations to the joint city-county meeting. That's a standard date in our joint powers agreements, that those presentations always happen at that time. Your next public hearing is September 3rd, which is the Tuesday after Labor Day. And the date to adopt the final budget will be September 24th.
all right. Thank you.
Thank
very
you.
much.
Madam Chair, sorry to be, have we put in the budget increases for Metro Communication that we've,
Yes.
okay, thank you.
Mhm. Thank you. So there will not be an additional budget hearing on July 9th. Anything else before I go to public input?
Can I do that too, public input?
No, you're banned. So this is our opportunity for public input. Remind you, you can only get up and talk about things that were not on the agenda, so I do not think anybody gets to get up and yell at us about the budget until after the meeting's over. But if is anyone here for public comment? Seeing no one running to the podium, I would entertain, I don't need to adjourn. Nope, we're done. We're all done. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to everyone who came this morning and to everyone who worked hard on their budgets. And it's a painful process, but it's a good, healthy process. So thank you very much.